And we are live on the gamification revolution. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. You can follow me at gzickerm. And welcome to this episode. It's season 3, episode 6 of the gamification revolution, where we talk with some of the leading thinkers, get the top insights from folks engaged in the process of engaging customers and employees and changing the world using the leading edge engagement science. And my guest today, the awesome Thomas Shu. Hi, Thomas.
Hello. Hi, Gabe. Hello,
Uh,
everyone.
yes, thank you for being here, and thanks all of you who are joining us live and those of you listening on the podcast. If you are with us live today, you can ask questions of Thomas or I. Ask anything you want to know about engagement by clicking one of these buttons that you'll see somewhere on your screen. It'll say submit a question or camera. If you have an actual camera on your computer, confirm, we'll bring you on. You can ask us questions live. If not, feel free to talk in the chat window, ask us questions there, click submit a question. We'll get as many of those answered as we possibly can today, and happy to help. And for those of you who missed it, the top of the show, you can go to gsummit.com, follow the link there in the instructions, and check out the great talks that just happened at G Summit in April, where Thomas was one of our best speakers. So Thomas, what is it that you do at Accenture that relates to gamification?
So I'm part of what's called the social collaboration team, the internal social collaboration team. So our team drives business strategy, process, change management, and technology requirements all around enabling the people at Accenture to collaborate effectively and to share their knowledge. My specific role is focused on the enablement and motivation aspects. So, how do we foster a culture of collaboration and start to change behaviors around collaboration? And so, gamification is part of that. And
So,
sort of as a hobby on the side, I also actually facilitate uh, Accenture's internal community of practice around gamification.
oh,
So,
cool. Okay, well, we're going to talk more
yeah.
about that. Let me ask you a question though. So,
Okay.
consultants at a company like Accenture, we tend to think of these driven, smart, young,
Yep.
fresh, and super high paid, type A, killer motivated
Right.
people. This is the impression of the
Mhm.
consultant. Why do you need to help them with their motivation?
Well, it's interesting. We did a study to try and understand what motivates people and what motivates people to collaborate. And we thought that, we're all type A personalities. We're really driven. We're very competitive. So we should use a lot of leaderboards and competition aspects. But it turns out that that really wasn't like having a leaderboard and being known as like the top collaborator wasn't necessarily what was driving people to collaborate. It was more being able to understand and articulate the impact they were having through collaboration. To be able to say, all right, I'm a great collaborator, but it's not just that, everyone likes to work with me, but be able to point to some hard metrics. Like I've uploaded 10 documents to our what's called the knowledge exchange, and 1,000 people have benefited from that. But actually, that in turn eventually translates into things like performance management, being recognized for it so that I can get that promotion or get that higher raise. But one of the things that we have to struggle with a bit, people are very driven, but typically in a consulting workforce, a lot of the focus is around driving sales or driving chargeability, right? And so collaboration, social collaboration is often seen as kind of a nice thing to have, a thing on the side, um, more of an extracurricular as opposed to being something core to what you do every day.
Oh, who sees
And
it
that's
that
kind of where
way?
we're trying to drive.
Who sees it that way? The consultants, the management? Who's got that bias?
I think it's really kind of at a lot of different levels because it's kind of driven from, we're driven by, in many ways, a lot of these metrics around chargeability, like how much time are you spending on a client chargeable project, and how much are you driving in terms of sales. And that's really what a lot of our consulting workforce and our managing directors, our senior executives are driven off of those numbers, and that kind of then drives down into the organization as well.
So how do you convince people to care about those other metrics that you describe? And I want to talk about the actual programs and stuff, but how do you convince everyone in the organization to like pay attention and focus to fit on things like collaboration and the need for that?
Well, I think it's really um, is creating a story, right? In gamification, we talk a lot about narrative. What's the narrative behind this? And the narrative that we try and drive is that it's a lot like I think of collaboration a lot like fitness or exercise, which is a great application of gamification, right? We're trying to help people become better versions of themselves. They know that they should be collaborating. They know kind of um, theoretically that it's good to be collaborating. That this is something that they should be doing, but they don't always have the motivation or the time, or maybe they don't quite know how to start doing it. And so I think gamification is a great way to get that message across and to start to enable them, get them to build some mastery in collaboration.
So
And it's
what?
really tying the collaboration. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. What have you actually? So what does the program look like at Accenture that you gamified?
So we have basically a number of social collaboration tools. So if you think about
Like
a lot of
Yammer and
external
such,
tools,
or
yeah, so we've got Accenture People, so social profiles similar to Facebook. We don't have Yammer. We actually do have Yammer, but we also have the activity stream, which is like the news feed on Facebook. It's
okay.
like microblogging, right? And using to ask questions, share insights, stay up to date on what's important to you. We have personal blogs, so everyone can write a blog about their perspective or point of view. Corporate video, uh, you know, a knowledge and content collection that everyone can contribute to. So we've got a lot of different things, and then following communities of practice, following colleagues. There's a lot of different behaviors and activities around social collaboration that can help people do their jobs better and faster and more effectively. So what we've done is really looked at some of those behaviors and tried to gamify those, right? Try to motivate those by adding a point system, a point structure, and a badging program around those activities, and looking at how do you also sort of build mastery, right? If someone who, for example, has never blogged before, but they're interested in getting started, how do you get them up that curve to learn how to blog, but then how to also market that blog effectively, how to put out an interesting point of view, how to grow a following for your blog.
And how do you do that? Do you give them kind of lessons and then they earn some kind of recognition every time they complete a lesson plan or something?
Yeah, so our program is actually kind of evolving. So we started the program back in, I think, 2007, and it was really more of a point system that you reward a certain number of points for each activity, depending on how valuable that particular behavior is, and then we give badges for sort of the top folks who are the top collaborators at Accenture, and there's a number of other rewards tied into that, besides just the flair. And then what we're looking to do is expand the program to take things like blogging. So um, starting out with a low barrier of entry, right? Getting someone to write that, or I'll take microblogging, getting someone to write that first microblog. They have no idea what microblogging is. They have no idea how it's relevant. How do you get them to do that very first one and get them in the door? Provide that positive feedback, right? That immediate positive feedback to start to pull them in. Then you start to teach them, okay, well, the next challenge is to learn how to use hashtags and understand, well, why is it important to use hashtags? Because when I use hashtags, more people who are going to see the question I'm asking, or to will see the insight that I'm sharing. And then how do you start at targeting communities of practice or people? Because the more you at target, the more you hashtag, the higher chance you're going to get a response.
So,
And
okay,
then,
yeah. So there's so much stuff going on, and you've talked about so many things, and I've got lots of questions for you, and I'm sure lots of folks have questions for you as well about the efficacy and what you've designed. And just as a reminder, if you're just joining us, Thomas Shu from Accenture here talking about internal gamification to create mastery and improve collaboration inside Accenture and what they've been doing. You can ask questions by clicking the submit question or the camera button, and we'll bring you on screen. So, Thomas, what do you, it sounds though like, the system that that you've described so far falls into that, what many people kind of dismiss as the points, badges, levels design for gamification, the sort of banal, simplistic design. Has that been effective for you? What do you think about that issue?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of bad gamification out there, right? That's not really well thought through. And Accenture is no exception to the rule. I've seen a lot of it. gamification has gotten a lot of interest internally within Accenture, and I've seen a lot of groups trying to roll out gamification, and some of it, you know, is not very meaningful. So what we try to do, I think, is really in how you design it, right? So what we try to do is understand what motivates people to collaborate from an extrinsic and intrinsic perspective, and then try and build the system around that. So
What did
on the
you learn?
surface, there might still be so from an extrinsic perspective, it's around, like I said, being able to understand the impact you're having and articulate it so that your career counselor, your supervisors, your leadership will care. And then tying that into performance management, right? So we're not looking at just gamification in itself, but looking at um, change, looking at it within the context of change management more broadly, looking at the employee lifecycle, things like performance management. So when someone is recognized for collaborating, they get formal feedback in the performance management process so that it helps them during the annual review.
Is
And we
that,
provide specific
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
and we provide those specific metrics that they can take to their annual review case to say, well, look, I just didn't do a great job on my client project. I shared the knowledge that we learned from that client, and there's hundreds or thousands of people who are benefiting from that and
I
having
see.
some impact there.
Does that work?
I,
Like,
how?
like, yeah, like that aspect of it.
I
Like you
think so.
just yeah. So
Yeah.
taking those metrics and saying, hey, I may not have killed it on my main thing that I did, right? But this other thing that I'm really good at, look, I shared with tens of thousands of people, which is I think what you're describing is these trickle down metrics are the core of your design experience. Does that really work? Does that change people's opinion inside the organization?
I think it's a journey, right? So I wouldn't claim that we're there, and that's like the driving force, right? I think typically when you compare two people in the rating process, the guy who's driving tons of sales is eventually going to win. But we come to a lot of cases where, it's hard to compare people sometimes, and sometimes people are very close. And there's always that line where you got to say, well, only one guy is going to get that promotion or that specific rating. What are the other things that they've been doing to make an impact? And I think that's starting to really become more effective. One other thing that we're doing is actually incorporating more strongly some of the social collaboration behaviors into what we call our performance factors.
And
So
what does
these are the
that mean?
factors that, so for each level, depending on your, where you are in the organization and your level, there's some certain criteria that you're evaluated against. And so we're incorporating things like using the social collaboration tools at Accenture to share your knowledge and incorporating those behaviors so that when people are evaluated, collaboration is one of those aspects. Um, but there's also a lot of other things besides just the performance management aspect around motivation. We look at a lot of other things like um, using social influence to motivate people, looking at the intrinsic motivations behind collaboration. And I think that's where you really have to go, right? I think with gamification, you can use a lot of extrinsic motivators, and that can pull people in and sort of give you a quick hit or spike in adoption. But if you don't get to the intrinsic motivation, eventually it's going to tail off, right? Um, Especially things like badges and those types of recognition, they start to lose their novelty. People start to tune out. You've got to get to the intrinsic motivation,
So
right? So mastery, autonomy, purpose.
yeah, and it sounds
So
like, I mean, you said you guys started doing this in 2007, which is really a long time ago. So over the sort of arc of, let's say, 6 or 7 years of having experience knocking around thinking about these things, Thomas, what do you think's been the kind of biggest success that you've had with the program? And what's been the sort of biggest failure, the biggest learning that you've had?
So I guess within the social collaboration realm, I mean, the biggest success is just starting to drive better adoption, right? So we started out with, we launched some microblogging tools. And, I would say the program hadn't really, we established the program in 2007, and it was kind of a very slow evolution. And things are starting to actually pick up now, where we're hoping to roll out some new technology in the next quarter, which I think will accelerate some of the change. I think so far what we've seen is that we've seen, for example, microblogging within the firm. It used to be that something like 0.5% within Accenture were active on the stream, which is like pretty minimal. We've now gotten to a point where we're up to around 12%,
Oh,
which is I
great.
think is a pretty good number in terms of
Oh, yeah.
contributions. Now, I'm not going to claim that that 12% is solely due to gamification and gamification alone. Uh, but we're okay with that because we look at gamification as part of a larger change program. Like we do on lockstep with our communications. We try and tie the story of it into our communications and our training and our enablement. And the technology has also gotten better, which I think drives part of it. But I do feel that the gamification, the recognition, is a motivator. And besides I guess the hard metrics, we've gotten a lot of strong anecdotal feedback. There's one example. There's actually a guy in Japan who was thinking of leaving the company, and he got recognized through the social collaboration program. And he actually told us, he's like, hey, I was actually thinking of leaving the company, but this recognition is so meaningful to me. I think I'm gonna stick around. Now, I don't know if he is still with the firm, but at that point, making that decision of I'm gonna leave Accenture to now I actually feel valued, I feel recognized by the company, and maybe in a way that the local organization hasn't made me feel.
Right. So
That
I
was a
think,
very powerful story for me.
I mean, I think that's great, and I think that's something that I think that's something that you hear a lot from folks who talk about gamification in the enterprise. They talk about recognition, the importance of recognition. But Dr. Vogelman has a question for us. Hi there, and the question is, what about the dependence on financial rewards? So you've been talking a lot about non-financial rewards. You haven't even talked about how other than abstractly how this might play into the performance review of somebody. How important are the financial rewards in your system? And certainly for such highly compensated people as an Accenture consultant might be, um, what are their feelings about it?
So I think financial rewards, it's really through the performance management process because the financial rewards are driven by your rating at the end of the year. So our take is to let's try and influence the performance management process so that collaboration is a key factor in that, and then that will drive if I collaborate well or collaborate effectively, demonstrate impact, I'll get paid more. The other aspect is um, the other aspect that we're looking to is virtual currency. So we've got something called celebrating performance points, where each person gets allocated a certain amount and they can recognize their peers for doing something good, right? They helped me out on something, they did a great job with this. Those points eventually translate into things you can redeem. And it's basically one celebrating performance points equals about $1.
Okay.
So we're looking at how do you incorporate that in the social collaboration context to say, well, this guy shared his knowledge and it helped our project, save X amount of dollars or X number of days in the implementation, and do it that way.
So why? I just want to get nerdy with you for 1 second. So I usually go out, Thomas, and one of my main points of evangelism is it's bad to build a kind of karma or feedback or reputation system that's directly tied to the dollar, where it's like one thing is $1, and even if you were going to do that, you would want to have like 100 of them per dollar, so that's a little bit more flexible in terms of the rewards. Why did you guys end up going with that approach, and have there been any upsides or downsides to doing that?
Well, so the Celebrating Performance program was a broader recognition and awards program within Accenture,
Okay, so it's
not
not just
necessarily
about
something that we
gamification.
developed. Yeah, yeah, it was something that was actually started a while ago. I mean, I think it's I mean, on the social collaboration side, again, the financial aspect is much more an indirect thing, right? It's through the performance management process. We're actually not giving, we do give some celebrating performance points for the top collaborators. Um, and I would say, I mean, from the surveys, people like those points because one, you don't have to wait till the end of the year to get them, right? Like it's immediate feedback.
Immediate, right?
It's something tangible, right? And there's meaning tied to it. And not to say when I redeem, in the catalog for an iPad, I don't tie that meaning back to what I actually did. But when they reward those points, they say, why did they do it? Like, what specifically did they do? How does it align to Accenture's core values and those types of things? But on the other hand, I do feel like there are certainly limitations to it, right? We know that financial rewards are not always the best motivators. They're not really that meaningful, right? And a lot of other things, such as you know access to leadership or status, and
Would
those
be
types of
more
things,
valuable.
tapping into the intrinsic motivations are much more valuable and
Yeah.
meaningful.
Were you
So
forced to embrace the awkwardly named celebrating performance point system? Was that something that you were kind of forced to do, or did you kind of embrace that and say, well, this is the coin of the realm, let's work with what we've got?
it was more the latter. It was a program that was started at Accenture a while ago, and it was kind of a lot of different programs have basically used it to as a easy financial system. They've already done a lot of the work, right, in terms of figuring out what are the tax implications and all those
Got
things.
it.
And it's a currency that's easily used across Accenture and that everyone knows of. So it's kind of something that we use. Again, it's a pretty small part of our program. Um, we do award some of them for a small percentage of people, but it's much more about the positive feedback they get, and and the feeling that they're actually helping out, being able to connect to other people, right? When you look again at the intrinsic side, social connectedness, autonomy to choose how they make an impact, all those types of things.
So, if you're just joining us, we're live on the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman, and our guest is Thomas Shu from Accenture, who's talking about all the great and interesting work they've done to gamify social collaboration inside the organization. If you want to hear more from Thomas and the 70 or so other folks who spoke at the recent Gamification Summit in San Francisco, you can check out gsummit.com and check out everything awesome that was said there. So, Tom says an interesting kind of question that I think all of this sort of begs the question that Marta's asking, and thanks, Marta, for asking this, which is, how did your upper management respond to this gamification program concept? Were they bought in right away? Did they need to be convinced? I mean, you seem like a really leading edge guy. You've been thinking about this for as long as someone like Rajat from Bunchball, or myself, or some of the early pioneers have been thinking about this topic area. Did you spend a lot of time like in your office at Accenture going, why don't they understand me?
Well, yeah. So to be upfront, I didn't start the program in 2007. I came on a bit later, actually watching your YouTube video, the Google Tech Talk.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but others on the team, started that program. So we actually haven't had a lot of issues with that for whatever reason. When we talked with a lot of the sponsors and CIO and in the business, I don't know. Maybe it's just this part of the organization, but they were like, this makes sense, right? It's about motivation. It's about they understand that it's about behavior change. Even our CIO, which CIOs typically tend to be focused more on the technology. They
Sure.
understand that a big part of the success is not just the technology, but the behavior change. How do you get people to use the tools? How do you get people to change their behaviors so they're not like picking up the phone to call the person they know or sending an email, but they start to use the global network, start to use the social collaboration tools as a more effective way to
Well, and
collaborate.
I mean, this is a huge problem, Thomas. They say that I've seen various reports, everything from 50% to 80% of enterprise software implementations fail to get user adoption inside the
Yeah,
organization, despite, in some cases being 10 or $20 million projects. And, one of the biggest things is that email and phone calls are a very entrenched kind of behavior. And
yeah,
it's really easy just to put things in an Excel spreadsheet instead of doing the CRM, to send someone an email instead of sending them a
right.
social collaboration message. So what have you learned about tying together gamification into that process in terms of changing people's behavior? And thanks for that great question, Marta.
Yeah, I think that's a really key use case for gamification in the enterprise, right? When you think about the enterprise context, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do that is not really much fun at all, right? Submitting time reports on time, getting the invoices in, or logging the opportunities in your SAP system or whatever it is. Those things are very tedious. The interfaces are not very fun at all. So I think but they're practical and they have real bottom line, impacts. So I think that's a key use case for gamification is to say, well, within the enterprise, how do you get people to do some of these things that we all know are good things to do, but it's hard to get that behavior change, to get that motivation to do it.
Have you,
So I think that's a key part.
what's been the biggest kind of difficulty or challenge, kind of as I asked before, what's been the biggest difficulty or challenge or kind of roadblock that you guys have actually encountered to bring this into the world to be successful?
I think the biggest challenge for us, and I think this is probably true for a lot of folks, is avoiding like the bad gamification, right? Like I think gamification is very hot right now. A lot of people are interested in it and think, oh, we'll just create a game, or we'll throw some points and badges on there, and all of a sudden people will want to do this stuff, right? But there's we know that's not true. So there's a lot of other folks at Accenture, not just the team I'm a part of, but a lot of other teams that um, are looking to use gamification, and it's like when if other teams do it poorly,
It reflects
that
badly on
that
everyone.
yeah, it decreases the effectiveness of gamification in general within Accenture, right? You
So
start to the novelty starts to wear off, and
yeah, so as the chief evangelist, I'm sure you do a lot of internal education and trying to help people understand what the best practices are and what the standards are.
yeah,
And this dovetails
yeah.
to a great question from Lori Quilos. Thanks, Lori, for your question. How does the learning and development organization play a role at Accenture? What's your connection with the training and development folks?
You mean internally or the
Yeah,
consulting side or in?
Yeah, let's talk about internal first, and then because you guys are consultancy, I'm interested in how you're taking what you've learned about gamification and projecting that into your customer-facing business. But let's start with internally. How's the existing learning and development infrastructure leveraged to help accomplish, the goals or gamification used for them?
Yeah, so the learning and development organization is starting to pick up on this as well. And I think they're looking at gamification, not just the motivational design aspect, but also the serious games and simulations aspect, which, as we know, has been around for quite some time.
Mhm.
So they're starting to use things like serious games to um, look at the new joiner process, for example. So one of the programs they're doing is looking at new joiners and trying to increase engagement and reduce turnover. And we found out that one of the reasons why people leave Accenture is that they don't necessarily feel like their career aspirations can be met within Accenture. But what they don't know is that we're a huge organization, right? We're over 250,000 people, and there's tons of different jobs within Accenture that might fit the aspiration. So what they did was they actually created, this was more of a serious game, but created a game to teach people to build awareness and understanding about, well, what really does Accenture do, right? What are the different offerings that we have? What are the different types of jobs you can do? You might be coding something very specific within your organization, but there's a whole breadth of variety across Accenture. So I think they're starting to pick up on it a bit more. We haven't really like done a ton of like the gamification of our LMS, for example, but that's something that's I think on the radar, right? More folks within our capability development group are starting to look at games and gamification and how to start apply that.
Now, what about, and thanks for that great question, Lori. Now, what about the other way around? What about taking what the organization has developed in gamification and projecting that out into your outbound business, since you are a consultancy, and I'm sure some of your clients are asking for gamification in the projects that you do for them.
Yeah, exactly. And so we've seen different parts of the practice pick up on gamification, right? So our SaaS practices start to incorporate gamification into the standard change management process because, obviously one of the big issues there is system adoption. Our talent and organization group is also starting to look at gamification from a change management perspective and from a learning perspective as well. And Accenture has actually started up a more formal practice within our emerging technologies and innovation group. They started up a social and gamification practice.
Okay.
So I think we're definitely starting to see the demand out there, and our clients are getting a lot of clients asking about it. And so I think on the consulting side, a lot of groups are trying to pick up on this, trying to figure out, well, how do I embed this into our existing change management approach, and to be able to drive more value for our clients.
So just in the last minute that we have left, unfortunately, we probably won't get to every question that's in queued here. But I'm curious, as the main gamification evangelist at Accenture, a big global company, a big brand, what advice would you give other people who are looking to be the Thomas Shoe inside of their organization, looking to be the main kind of gamification expert for their company and become the central resource and help drive this idea forward inside the organization? What would you tell them?
Maybe a couple things. Obviously, learn as much as you can about gamification, about how it works, about like the science behind it, right? It's so fascinating that, a great thing about it is that there is real science behind it that explains why this stuff works. And that science is evolving and changing. So I think really understanding that is key. And then also positioning that in the right way. So even though I necessarily didn't have issues when I brought up the term gamification, I'm sure there's tons of people who will run into that. So, positioning it not as gamification or that we're all going to be playing games at work, but positioning it as, we're looking at user engagement, we're looking at adoption, we're looking at, behavior shaping, we're looking at, you know, I guess on the external facing side, you could talk about user loyalty, but even within the enterprise, looking at, all those things about how do you get people to do the things that we know are the right things to do. And I think that will resonate with anyone.
And I think that's great advice, and I'm sure passion and persistence play a role in that as well.
Yes.
So I want to thank you very much, Thomas Shu from Accenture. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you very
And
much. It's great
for,
talking with you.
yeah, awesome having you. Awesome, awesome. And of course, again, you can see what Thomas had to say at the recent G Summit, along with myself, 70 other folks, gsummit.com. Check out those videos. Sign up for video access today. And as always, we'll be back next week with another awesome episode of the Gamification Revolution, doing live Q&A with you every week. You can follow me on Twitter at @gzakerm or visit gamification.co for more information about this exciting new topic. In the meantime, looking forward to seeing everybody next week. Keep having fun. Bye, everyone.
Bye.